So today's topic, what we're going to be going over is a lot about resource types, what they are, and then some of the new changes that we've added into the system with this new release. So the way we get to our resource types is if we now go under System Settings, there is a resource type selection. This shows us all of our different resource types. This is one of the basic building blocks of the whole system. What we've always talked about is our system is not a one-size-fits-all package. It is a configuration on top of configuration on top of configuration. And this really allows our customers to detail their system to their needs, hopefully, instead of forcing them to live within our bounds and assumptions. So as an example, there are a couple different resource types, and we can, where those show up on the left hand side is if they are service types, they will show up under the service categories. If they are contact types, they will show up under the contacts, and etc. So if we go to create a new resource type, you can give it a name, which is the singular form of the name, and then also add a plural name. Sometimes it's a matter of adding S. Sometimes it's the same name as an example, a resource called trucking would have the same name for both the singular and the plural, as an example. The availability mode allows us to track what type of availability algorithm we should enable for this type of a resource type. As an example, a rental resource would be a permanent asset. It is part of our inventory. It should go out, and we should expect it to come back in. And if all goes well, it'll be in our inventory as long as we have it in there. An incoming asset is something that we use for, say, a purchase order element type. If we're going to purchase something, the way our start date and end date work is the end date is when this action is completed, it will be counted as coming into our stock. So it won't show up in availability calculations until the end date is passed for the planning item. A temporary asset takes an item with the start date as this is when we're looking at our schedule of things, it is temporarily going to come into our availability calculation on the start date, and by the end date, it will be scheduled to not be in our availability calculation. And so those are things. Outgoing asset would be something that is scheduled to leave our assets on a specific time. We have a new feature here called Expendable type. This can only be enabled for one resource type at a time. So as an example, if you have a retail resource type and you hit Expendable is yes, what you're saying is when I drop in an item that is set to be expendable, it will use this resource type automatically. So even if we're in a quote that defaults to a rental resource, if I use an inventory type, say a perishable good, that is something that we call the test expendable. If we open up this item and set it as under edit inventory item and mark it as expendable is yes, it will default to using our retail resource type on the quote instead of a rental resource type. So as an example, with that set, I'm just going to open up a quick quote here, and I'll give you just a quick example. Say our audio item, if we were to drop in, say, a mixer, this should default to a rental resource type because that's what a quote that we've configured it as. So let's drop in a Clearcom dual channel belt pack, and when we drop that in, it's using a rental resource type. Now, This is set up as an expendable, and the retail resource is set as an expendable resource type. So when we drag this item in, it should automatically change itself to a retail resource, not a rental resource. So this will make it so your expendables drag in automatically and you don't have to change them from rental to retail. Report codes are used for our programmers in the back end if we're putting together customized reports and we need to pull specific data and tabulate that up towards a specific resource type or multiple resource types together. This would allow us to, per customer, create specific codes based on their resource types. Number captions, we can give specific numbering schemes to specific resource types, and we can call that number a specific caption. Enable venue extensions, the way we use that, if we have a resource type called venue, we can say, I want to enable some venue extensions. And so if we go to contacts and venues and open up a venue, what this will allow us to do is to configure some new functionality and have a new tab show up. So there now is a new facility tab for that has some venue detail that we can drop in. And we've started to work on some functionality to break out this venue into very specific rooms, etc. So again, because there are more than just US customers that use it, we need the ability for them to change this resource to something besides venues and be able to configure what that venue resource is and associate it. Taxable yes or no, what this allows us to do is to associate whether we can configure taxes for this resource or not. And just because we've enabled the taxable resource type doesn't mean that we're going to be able, that it's automatically taxed. It just enables us to configure a value for that resource per warehouse. So if we go to System Settings and Sales Tax Rules, and we open up this rule that we call Pickup. All of these are the resource types that we have configured that we want to enable to configure tax rules based around them. So if we go and we look at travel under our resource types, you'll see that its taxable enabled is set to yes. But then we can go and configure, oh, at the Denver office, we don't put sales tax on our travel, but the other warehouses do have taxes associated with it. So it just enables you to configure a tax. By default, a new taxable resource would show up as 0 on all of your sales tax rules. So you would have to go back in and enable a value per resource source per warehouse. Discountable enabled, yes or no, has the same functionality but for standard discounts. Just because we enable a discount doesn't mean we have configured the sales tax value or the discount value. So as an example, let's go back to our resource types. The only discounts that we have enabled so far for standard discounts are rental resources and retail and subrentals. Everything else we have configured that we will not be able to configure a value for that discountable item. So if we go to System Settings, Standard Discounts, we made a discount called 10%, and what you'll notice is there is our rental and our retail, and those are our discounts per price model. So that's how you can configure what you want to show up in this value or in in each standard discount, and then you can assign an appropriate value. The other new feature that we've got here is call time enabled. So right now we have a call time enabled for a resource called labor and a call time enabled for a trucking resource type. So if we go back to our quote test labor, when you dragged in a labor item, it gave us this new call time feature here so that you can schedule a very specific time that this audio engineer will be enabled for. We can also, with our new pricing model, allow you to create specific tax rules or price rules that will split out the time into normal and overtime, etc. So if you are a customer that says, I don't want call times enabled for my labor, I just want to keep them straight call times the way we've done in the past, you could open up System Settings, Resource Types. You could then open up your labor resource type, and you could say call time enabled is set, change that to no. So now, if we go back to our quote, and we go to our services, and we drag in a labor, that call time will no longer be associated with that resource type. Another thing that someone asked us, hey, what about trucking? Could we use that call time widget for trucking so we can tell, the customer when that truck is going to be, when we want to schedule the truck for? And we were just playing with that. So again, it's just a widget that we enabled for that resource type. It's all very configurable in the system. So the final settings that we have in here are sales account and purchase orders account. So you can, when we map resources out to QuickBooks, we can assign very specific, we can map these names to specific accounts in QuickBooks. So if we sell something or rent something, we want it to push to an account in QuickBooks called retail income. Or if we purchase one of these items, we want it to go into a retail purchase account. So that's where we can set up a very specific QuickBooks account per resource type. So all of this enables us to configure these resources again as a building block. One other thing to realize again is everything is set up as a building block upon building blocks. So as an example, if we created a new resource called trucking here that we want to place and add a new trucking service, just because we've enabled this resource types, there's still a secondary configuration on configuring whether that resource is enabled for a specific element type. So an element we might consider and call it a quote, which is a financial document. So under projects, project elements, if we open up quotes, when we create a new resource type, there is a tab in this element configuration called Allowable Resource Types. So there's our allowable resource types. And so if we create a new resource, we want to make sure that we enable that resource type for that element. So if we want to have this trucking enabled and be able to see it as a resource type called trucking in the quote, then we need to make sure that we select this to add and hit Save Changes. While we're in here, we'll get sidetracked just slightly. We have this new area that we call production tasks. And where we can configure those is under system settings. I guess here we call them labor tasks. We can create different tasks that we might want to add notes to for a specific line item. In general, this was related to being able to assign labor task for a specific call time. So as an example, we created a labor task called travel, load in, setup, focus, rehearsal. We can drag and drop to organize what order they should show up in. And then when we go back to our resource type, we're saying here under allowable resources for labor that we want to be able to add production tasks as a note. Make sense? So I'm going to go back to our labor resource type. I'm going to re-enable our call time. Go back to our quote and delete these line items for now, just for fun. And so I can go and grab my audio system engineer and drag that in. Again, the call time widget is enabled. Now, when we click on quotes, it'll pop up a new widget with all of our different labor tasks. So if we want to have this be load in, operate, and strike, we can select those three and click out of that. And so now it'll fill in our notes automatically for what that labor call time is going to be performing during that call time. So those are ways that we can configure how these are added in and displayed. So as a quick review, under System Settings, Resource Types, this is where we can configure the very specific resources and whether they are taxable, discountable, whether the call time is enabled, their availability mode. If you are creating new resource types, you do need to enable that resource type for a very specific element. So if you want to do that, you would go under Projects, Project Elements, and enable that probably for both quotes and invoices as an example. And then with the call time, you can also associate labor tasks and things like that. I hope that gives you a better insight into the building block that we called resources. If you have any specific questions, you can contact support at flexrentalsolutions.com for some